I didn't realize it at first. Or maybe I did in small ways, and just didn't put it together. That's probably closer to the truth. Because when I look back now, there wasn't one moment where everything became clear. It was more like a series of small things that didn't seem important on their own. Things I noticed, and then explained away. Things I felt, and then told myself I was overthinking. And I think that's the part that's hardest to admit. Not that it happened, but that I kept adjusting to it. Quietly, without really questioning it. At the beginning, none of that was there. Or at least, it didn't feel like it was. When we first met, everything felt intentional. That's the word that comes to mind. Like when she talked to me, she was actually there. Not distracted. Not half somewhere else. Just present. I remember the first time we had dinner together. It wasn't anything special. Just a small place with dim lighting and tables a little too close to each other. The kind of place where you can hear parts of other people's conversations if you're not careful. But somehow, it felt like we had our own space anyway. We talked for a long time. Long enough that I lost track of time. And that doesn't happen often. Not like that. Usually, even in good conversations, there's a moment where you become aware of time again. Where you check your phone. Or think about what you have to do later. But that night didn't have that moment. It just continued. And I remember thinking, sometime during that dinner, this feels easy. Not forced. Not something I have to work at. Just natural. She asked questions. Real ones. Not the kind people ask out of politeness. The kind that make you stop for a second and think about the answer. And she listened in a way that made those answers feel worth saying. That mattered more than I realized at the time. Because feeling heard is something you don't notice until it changes. Back then, I didn't question anything. I didn't look for signs. I didn't analyze the way she responded or how often she reached out. Everything felt balanced. If I texted her, she responded. If she texted me, I responded. If we made plans, we both showed up. There was no sense of unevenness. At least, not in the beginning. We saw each other regularly. Not constantly, but enough that it felt like something was building. Not rushing. Just moving forward. I remember one evening when we went for a walk after dinner. It wasn't planned. We just didn't feel like ending the night yet. So we kept walking, talking about things that didn't really matter. Or at least, they didn't seem like they mattered. But somehow, those conversations felt more real than the ones that were supposed to. She told me a story about something from her childhood. I told her something I hadn't told many people. And there was this feeling, like we were slowly opening something. Not all at once. Just a little at a time. That feeling stayed with me for a while. Even after the first few months. It didn't disappear suddenly. It just changed. Slowly. Almost in a way that was easy to miss. I think the first thing that shifted was the way plans happened. In the beginning, plans felt mutual. We would decide together. Or it would just happen naturally. One of us would suggest something. The other would respond. And we would figure it out. But over time, I started noticing something small. I was the one suggesting things more often. Not all the time. But enough that I became aware of it. At first, I didn't think much of it. Someone has to take initiative, right? That's normal. That's what I told myself. But then I started noticing something else. When I didn't suggest anything, nothing happened. Days would pass. Sometimes longer. Without her bringing anything up. Without her asking if I was free. Without her trying to make a plan. And I remember the first time that really stood out to me. I had decided not to reach out for a couple of days. Not as a test. At least, that's what I told myself. I just wanted to see what would happen. And nothing did. No message. No call. No, hey, what are you doing this week? Just silence. And when I finally reached out, she responded normally. Like nothing had happened. Like there was no gap. And that's when the first thought appeared. Small. Easy to ignore. If I don't move this forward, it doesn't move. I didn't say that out loud. I didn't even fully accept it. I just noticed it. And then I explained it away. She's busy. She has things going on. Not everyone communicates the same way. All of that sounded reasonable. And maybe it was. But the pattern didn't stop. It continued. Quietly. I started noticing it in other ways too. The way she responded sometimes. Not in what she said. In how long it took. At the beginning, conversations flowed. Back and forth. There was a rhythm. Then, slowly, that rhythm changed. I would send something. She would respond later. Not always. But often enough that it became noticeable. And again, I told myself it didn't matter. People get busy. Not every conversation has to be immediate. That's true. But there's a difference between being busy and being less present. And I think, deep down, I felt that difference. I just didn't want to define it. Because defining it would mean admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. There was one night that stands out more than the others. Not because anything dramatic happened. Because of how normal it felt. We had plans. Dinner. Nothing complicated. I was looking forward to it. Not in an intense way. Just in that steady way you look forward to seeing someone you care about. She texted me earlier that day. Said something had come up. She might be late. I said that was fine. Of course it was. Things come up. That's normal. An hour passed. Then another. Eventually, she told me she wouldn't make it. Something had taken longer than expected. Again, I said it was okay. Because what else do you say? But after that, I remember sitting there, thinking something I hadn't thought clearly before. If it were reversed, I would have made it. Or at least tried harder to. That thought didn't feel like blame. It felt like comparison. And comparison can be quiet. But it changes things. Because once you start comparing effort, you start noticing imbalance. Not all at once. Just gradually. And that's when another realization started forming. Not fully. Just pieces of it. I was adjusting more than she was. Making space. Making effort. Making things work. And she was there. But not in the same way. Not with the same weight. Not with the same intention. And I think that's when the deeper questions started to appear. Not does she care? Something more specific. Am I as important to her as she is to me? I didn't answer that question. Not then. Because the answer was already there. And I wasn't ready to say it. So I stayed in it. Kept moving forward. Kept making plans. Kept telling myself that relationships aren't always perfectly balanced. That things even out over time. That not every moment means something. And all of that might be true. But patterns mean something. And the pattern was becoming harder to ignore. There was one moment where it became clearer than I wanted it to be. We were sitting together. Same space. Same quiet. And she mentioned something. Casually. Not even directed at me, really. Just part of a conversation. About someone else. About how she had rearranged her schedule to see them. Moved things around. Made time. And I remember feeling something shift inside me. Not jealousy. Not exactly. Something quieter. Recognition. Because I realized. She could make that effort. She just didn't do it for me. And that thought stayed. Longer than anything else. Because it wasn't about what she said. It was about what it revealed. That effort wasn't the problem. Priority was. And once you see that, it's hard to unsee. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask. I didn't say, why does it feel like I'm the one adjusting more? Because I already knew the answer would be vague. Or comforting. Or something that wouldn't change the pattern. So I stayed quiet. And kept observing. And slowly, the realization became something I couldn't avoid anymore. Not dramatic. Not painful in a loud way. Just clear. I wasn't the first choice. Not in the way I thought I was. Not in the way I wanted to be. I was an option. A good one. A comfortable one. But not the one she moved things for. Not the one she chose first when something else appeared. And I think that's when everything started to feel different. Not because anything ended. Because something became undeniable. And once something becomes undeniable, you don't feel it all at once. You just carry it. Quietly. The same way I had carried everything else. Only now it had a shape. And I couldn't pretend I didn't see it anymore. I didn't say anything after that. Not the next day. Not the next week. I just kept noticing. And that's what changed things the most. Not what she did. Not what she said. What I started to see. Because once something becomes clear, even quietly, it changes how everything else feels. The same actions start to look different. The same pauses start to mean more. The same silences feel heavier. I remember one afternoon. Nothing special about it. I was sitting alone, scrolling through my phone, not really paying attention to anything. And I realized something simple. I was waiting for her to reach out. Not consciously. Just there. In the background. That small expectation. And when you become aware of that kind of waiting, it's uncomfortable. Because it makes you ask a question you don't want to ask. Why am I always the one waiting? That thought stayed longer than I expected. Because it wasn't just about that moment. It was about a pattern. A quiet one. But consistent. I started thinking back to other times. Other moments that felt similar. Times when I reached out first. Times when I made plans. Times when I adjusted my schedule to make things work. And I tried to remember moments when she did the same. Not small things. Real effort. And I could think of a few. But not many. Not enough to balance the feeling I had. And again, I told myself maybe I was overthinking. Maybe this is just how things feel sometimes. Maybe relationships aren't always equal in every moment. That's true. But there's a difference between imbalance that shifts and imbalance that stays. And ours stayed. There was one evening where it became harder to ignore. We were supposed to meet. Just something simple. Nothing complicated. I had finished what I needed to do that day early. Cleared my schedule a little. Not in a big way. Just made space. Because I wanted to see her. And she texted. Said she might be late again. Something came up. I read the message. And I remember not feeling surprised. That was the part that stayed with me. Not disappointment. Recognition. Like I had already expected it. And that expectation felt quiet. But heavy. Because when you start expecting someone to choose something else over you, you've already understood something. Even if you haven't said it yet. I told her it was fine. Again. Of course I did. And later that night, when she finally showed up, everything felt normal. We talked. We sat together. She apologized lightly. I said it was okay. And it was. On the surface. But underneath, something had shifted. Because I realized I wasn't reacting anymore. I was adjusting. Automatically. Without even thinking about it. An adjustment, over time, becomes something else. It becomes acceptance. Not acceptance of a situation. Acceptance of a role. And I think that's when I started to understand my role in the relationship. Not fully, but enough. I was the one who made things work. The one who filled the gaps. The one who kept the connection moving. And she participated. But she didn't carry it the same way. She didn't need to. Because I was already doing it. That realization didn't make me angry. That's the strange part. It made me quiet. Because anger requires something to push against. And there was nothing to push against. No argument. No conflict. Just a pattern. A quiet, consistent pattern. I remember another moment that made it clearer. We were sitting together again. She was telling me about her week. Something about a friend. Something about plans. And she mentioned rearranging her schedule again. Making time. Adjusting things. For someone else. And I felt that same thing again. Not jealousy. Not resentment. Just clarity. Because it wasn't about what she was doing. It was about what she wasn't doing. Not for me. And I realized something in that moment. Effort wasn't difficult for her. It just wasn't directed at me the same way. And once that becomes clear, it's hard to reinterpret everything as coincidence. Patterns become meaning. And meaning becomes understanding. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask. Why do you make time for them, but not for me? Because I knew the answer wouldn't change anything. It would be explained, softened, turned into something reasonable. And maybe it would be reasonable, but it wouldn't change the feeling. Because the feeling wasn't coming from one moment. It was coming from all of them. Together. Slowly building into something I could no longer ignore. There was a night when I finally admitted it to myself. Not out loud. Just internally. I was sitting alone again. Thinking about everything. Not in a dramatic way. Just going over it. The patterns. The effort. The waiting. The adjusting. And I asked myself something simple. If I stopped trying, what would happen? And the answer came quickly. Not emotionally. Just clearly. Nothing. Nothing would happen. Because everything that was happening was already being carried by me. That realization didn't feel like heartbreak. It felt like something settling into place. Like a piece of understanding I had been avoiding finally finding where it belonged. I wasn't the first choice. Not in the way I had believed. Not in the way I had hoped. I was available, present, reliable. And those things matter. But they're not the same as being chosen first. And that difference is quiet. But it changes everything. After that, things didn't end immediately. Of course they didn't. Because nothing in our relationship ever ended dramatically. Everything just continued. The same conversations. The same plans. The same pattern. But I was different inside it. I wasn't expecting the same things anymore. I wasn't waiting in the same way. I wasn't adjusting as automatically. I was noticing. And noticing creates distance. Not between people. Inside you. It separates what you feel from what you accept. And that space, it grows. Slowly. Until one day, you realize you're standing slightly outside of something you used to be fully inside. I remember the last time we sat together. Not because it was the end. Because it felt the same. Same tone. Same rhythm. Same familiarity. And I realized something as I listened to her speak. I wasn't hoping anymore. Not for more effort. Not for something to change. Just listening. Calm. Present. But not expecting anything beyond what I already knew. And that's when it became clear in a way that felt final. Not painful. Just complete. I had already understood my place in her life. And once you understand that, you stop trying to redefine it. You either accept it, or you quietly step away from it. I didn't make a scene. I didn't say anything that sounded like an ending, because there wasn't a moment that needed one. It had already ended in a quieter way, much earlier, when I realized I was always adjusting, always waiting, always second. And I think that's what stayed with me the most. Not what she did, not what I did, just the awareness. How long I had been there, without fully admitting it, and how easy it is to stay in a place where you're not the first choice, as long as no one says it out loud. Now, when I think about it, I don't feel anger, or even regret, just a kind of understanding about how quiet these things can be, how something can look balanced on the surface, while something underneath is slowly becoming clear, and how sometimes the hardest part isn't being second, it's realizing you always were, and only noticing it when you finally stop adjusting. And by then, there isn't much left to say. After that, there wasn't a clean ending. No conversation where everything was laid out. No moment where we both agreed something had changed. It just loosened. The connection, I mean, like something that had been held tightly for a long time finally stopped being held at all. And once that tension is gone, things don't break. They drift. We still talked. Just less. Still saw each other. Just not as often. And each time, it felt a little more optional. That's the word that comes to mind now. Optional. Not necessary. Not something either of us was actively protecting anymore. And I noticed something else too. I wasn't reaching out the same way. Not because I was trying to prove something. Because I didn't feel that same pull. That same urgency. That same quiet expectation. And at first, that felt strange. Almost unfamiliar. Because for so long, I had been the one moving things forward. The one making sure the connection didn't fade. But once I stopped doing that, nothing rushed in to replace it. No sudden effort. No shift. Just space. And that space grew. Not dramatically. Just a little more each time. A few days between conversations. Then longer. And eventually, it felt like we were both standing on opposite sides of something that neither of us was trying to cross anymore. I don't remember the exact last time we saw each other. Not clearly. That's probably what says the most. Because if something ends in a meaningful way, you usually remember the last moment. The last conversation. The last look. But with us, it blurred. Just like everything else. One of the last times we met, we sat together for a while. Talked about small things. Work. Plans. Nothing different. Nothing that suggested it was the end. And I remember noticing something as we sat there. Not about her. About myself. I felt calm. Not the calm of comfort. The calm of acceptance. Like I had already stepped away internally, even though I was still physically there. And that feeling didn't scare me. It didn't even feel sad in a strong way. It just felt clear. Like something that had been uncertain for a long time had finally settled into something I didn't need to question anymore. I wasn't waiting. I wasn't adjusting. I wasn't trying to read between the lines. I was just there. And I think that's when I understood something I hadn't fully allowed myself to before. I had been holding on to something that wasn't being held in the same way on the other side. Not intentionally. Not maliciously. Just differently. And once you see that difference clearly, you stop trying to close it. Because closing it would mean changing something that isn't yours to change. And that's a strange realization. Because it takes away the illusion that you can fix something just by trying harder. Sometimes, trying harder is exactly what keeps you in the same place. I think I understood that too. Slowly. Not all at once. That my effort wasn't solving anything. It was maintaining something that didn't have the same weight for both of us. And when effort becomes one-sided like that, it doesn't create balance. It creates distance. Quiet distance. The kind that doesn't announce itself. But you feel it. In the way things don't move unless you move them. In the way silence stretches without being filled. In the way presence starts to feel optional. After that, things didn't need to end formally. They had already shifted into something that didn't require a conclusion. We just stopped. Gradually. Without deciding to. And that's what still feels strange when I think about it now. How something can exist for so long. Feel important. Feel real. And then slowly become something you're no longer inside. Not because it collapsed. Because it stopped being held. I think about that sometimes. About how easy it is to stay in something when there's no conflict. No clear reason to leave. Just small imbalances that don't seem big enough to matter on their own. But over time, they add up. They create a shape. A quiet understanding. And once that understanding is there, you can't unsee it. You can ignore it for a while. But eventually, it becomes part of how you experience everything. I don't think she ever said anything like, "You're not my priority." She didn't have to. It was there in the way things happened, in the way they didn't, in the way effort moved in one direction more than the other. And I think that's what I learned from all of it. Not something dramatic, not something that feels like a lesson, just an awareness. That being chosen isn't something you should have to question. It shows up, quietly, but clearly, in the way someone makes space, in the way they adjust, in the way they reach for you without needing a reason. And when that's not there, you feel it, even if you don't name it right away, even if you keep explaining it away, even if you stay longer than you probably should. Eventually, it becomes something you understand without needing words. And once you understand it, something inside you shifts, not in a loud way, just enough. Enough to stop trying to fill the space that isn't being met from the other side. Enough to stop adjusting. Enough to stop waiting. And when that happens, things don't end suddenly. They just fade into something quieter. Something that doesn't ask for your attention anymore. Something that feels finished, even if no one ever said it out loud. Now, when I think about it, I don't replay specific moments as much. I don't go back to conversations or try to find where it could have been different. I just remember the feeling, that quiet realization, the one that didn't arrive all at once, but stayed, and slowly became impossible to ignore. That I was always making space, in a place where I wasn't being chosen the same way. And once I saw that clearly, there wasn't anything left to figure out, just something to accept. And acceptance doesn't always feel like closure. Sometimes it just feels like the end of a question you've been asking for a long time, even if the answer was always there.